Hello adventurers and welcome to the Hero Table, your one-stop shop for all things ttrpg and D&D related. And today we're going to be diving into one of the most exciting, albeit sometimes challenging aspects of D&D, the combat. You see, while D&D combat can be an absolute blast, it can also be slow and repetitive if you're not careful. I know that early on in my own D&D career, I struggled immensely with getting my players engaged during combat. So whether you're a DM or a player, I'm going to bring you 3 ways that you can spice up your combat in D&D 5th edition. But as always, before we get started, do remember to like, comment, and subscribe as it helps feed the algorithm. And if you want to support the channel in a more personal way, do check out my merch links down below. So with all that being said, let's grab a pint, pop a squat, and let's go ahead and get started with today's video. So first off, let's talk about dynamic combat objectives. You see, combat doesn't always have to be about reducing the enemy NPC's HP down to 0, and I encourage all of you guys to think outside the box during your combat encounters. Maybe instead of just having to beat every enemy in the room, there's side objectives. Maybe you need to prevent a ritual from being completed before a certain number of turns. Maybe you need to defend an NPC during the combat encounter. Or maybe you need to retrieve a magical item before the room collapses in on itself. For example, maybe instead of just fighting a group of bandits, the players are also having to fight the bandits who are simultaneously trying to light a fuse to blow up a bridge. Now, the players are forced to not only fight the bandits, but they have to do so carefully, picking the ones that are lighting the fuses or targeting the ones that are cutting the ropes. By doing this, you can add tension, strategy, and a sense of urgency to pretty much every encounter. Dynamic combat will force your players to think creatively and make combat more than just a story or a numbers game. So next time your party enters a combat encounter, maybe add a few dynamic entries to change things up. Next, we're going to talk about using terrain and environmental hazards. I think we can all pretty much agree that a flat, empty battlefield is boring. So instead, change up the battlefield by including things like interesting terrain features and hazards that will change the flow of combat. Is the fight happening in a crumbling temple? If so, maybe have rocks falling from the ceiling and damaging your players every round where they have to make a dex saving throw or else they get pummeled by the falling debris. Is the fight taking place in a swamp? Maybe make the entire battlefield difficult terrain, limiting their movement and then penalizing them for standing still, adding things like quicksand or damage if they stay in one spot too long. You can also use interesting elements like chandeliers or wall torches to hang from and swing from, or levers to activate traps. By adding elements like this to your combat encounters, you're not only encouraging your players to think more creatively and utilize the environment effectively during combat, but you are also as a whole making combat feel not just more dynamic, but more immersive too. So maybe next time your party has a fight in a lich's lair, add a little acid rain to spice things up. And the last tip that I have is giving your enemies personality and tactics. Now, while this one may seem kind of obvious, the truth is that oftentimes combat makes your monsters just into basically bags of hit points that you have to beat until they fall to 0. When in truth, they're living or sometimes undead creatures with their own goals, personalities, fears, and strategies that they're going to implement on your players. For example, a horde of goblins may not be as effective in an upfront combat situation, so maybe instead you give them hit and run tactics, where they're setting up traps across the entirety of the battlefield, forcing your players to split up and hitting them with small doses of damage throughout the course of the fight, all while attacking them from the shadows. A dragon with their giant egos may not attack the players outright, but instead want to play with their food just a little bit, and instead fly around the battlefield using their breath weapon to control the flow of combat by limiting their ability to escape in different directions. Even something as simple as having your bandits shout taunts at your players, or maybe beg for mercy at the end of a combat session, is enough to make everyone feel far more engaged and immersed in the combat. When the enemies in your game start to feel like real opponents with their own motivations, their own goals, and their own fears instead of just bags of hit points, it adds a sophisticated layer of depth to your combat encounters that will keep your players on their toes and, more importantly, keep them immersed into the game. So there you go. By using dynamic objectives, utilizing the terrain creatively, and giving your enemies personality, you can turn any simple combat encounter into an unforgettable experience in your campaign. Because remember, combat is more than just an opportunity to roll dice and do damage. It's an experience. It's a story that's being told by the players, and you are giving them the opportunity to create these epic memories. So make sure that you're making the most of it. But that is all the time I have today, adventurers. So if you found any of these tips useful, do let me know down below. I always appreciate each and every one of your guys' feedback, and I hope you guys are enjoying the new content on the channel. I've got a hell of a lot more content planned, and I can't wait to bring you guys more videos on tips and tricks and guides to make your experience at the D&D table even better. So, until next time, may your rolls be critical, your adventures legendary, and I'll see you at the table.